And thank you for joining the Energy Market Update. A special welcome to all of our channel partners who were able to make it today. That's me on the left, John Vieira. On the right, we have the trusty legal disclaimer, and we'll be covering the normal agenda with natural gas fundamentals, market news, a look at the weather, and then end up with market data to see where the prices have been moving. So starting off with natural gas fundamentals, we've been on quite the roller coaster this winter, going up and down as we approach fall, winter really kind of changing around. Looks like we were getting closer to that 5-year average and then would keep jumping back up to have plenty of surplus, making people feel comfortable and continuing to see the price slide that we have. For this week, we had estimates of 62 at 66. So just a couple weeks ago, we were getting triple digits above 300 and above 200 BCF pulls. Now into the double digits, kind of around that mid part instead of that higher 80 to 100 level. So the estimates of 62 to 66 were well missed. So we came in well below that withdrawal at only 49 being taken out of storage. So probably seeing prices. Important number we've really been looking at is where we're going to end up compared to the 5-year average. Now, 2 weeks ago, we were getting close to only 100 above, and it looked like that might be a recipe for a spike coming into the end of February and March for the end of winter. That is not the case anymore. We are back to 348 above the 348 above that 5-year average. We are now back above the 5-year historical range for the min-max, which is the light gray shaded area. So it seems like from a gas perspective, we're going to be comfortable through the end of this winter unless something drastically changes. And we do have some cold weather coming in, but now it seems like we'll be okay for this winter. The big change is going to be looking at the coming winter, and when we get to the weather section, talk about possibly switching out of the El Nino into La Nina. So just taking a look at that on the graph, taking a look at the green arrow, blue is where we currently are. We see it's outside of the shaded gray. Again, when the blue line's above the shaded gray, very comfortable position. When it starts getting close to that dark gray line, that's when the worry starts to continue to build upward pressure on prices. When we get below there, that's when we really can see prices take off for risk. And for the coming week of 2/16, again, very early for estimates, but again, smaller pool with double digits, 56 at 76. Which may change because, again, the cold storm just came this week. This will be through last Friday. And then the 2-week pull from now might be a big one to end off the year. So if the winter does expand, we could run into a late season push. For channel partners on the call, this is an updated graph. As you can see, 2025 is added and it moves out into the future. One thing we were noting over the past 2 weeks is that the demand, the magenta pink line, it moved up above where the production was, and it was lower when it was originally forecasted, where you see the red arrow. And as we go out into the future, taking a look at the yellow gold line, we don't really see that increasing too much. Yes, production did move up a little bit during 2023, but the biggest story is what's going to happen with LNG. So we know LNG is being shipped around the world because it costs more money. We know that since 2016, we entered LNG market exporting from our shores, and it's been going up at a very sharp rate, and over the next several years expected to possibly double from around 14 and change to higher. We saw the middle graphic compared to the right graphic because December numbers haven't been released, and then the new graphic will come out. So just putting together that, you're seeing that underneath the yellow line are the rest of the months of the year for July, August, September, showing that it did have a dip. It's starting to move back up. The other story out there is the LNG pause. Now, that is only on certain LNG products that President Biden put in place. We're waiting to see if this is a 4 or 6 month, maybe a year pause, or if it's an actual ban that will go through. The media headlines are very misleading. If you just read the top, it says ban. Looks like a reevaluation by the Department of Energy after FERC already passed approval of these. And so this is the first time in history the DOE would be able to come in and do it. We don't know if it will even be upheld by the court, so it might be a whole lot of nothing, but a story that we need to keep an eye on. And just for referencing, the national balancing point for the UK, the title transfer facility for the EU, and the Japan-Korean marker are some of the price points to explain if a client's looking to see, well, how much higher are the prices? You can point them in that direction. Also updated for this month, coming out on the 1st, is the new risk profile. So not too much change from the January, because again, we had extended further out into the future. We see 25 at the bottom and then going out to 26, even though the number is not listed. We see as further we go out into the future, the more that risk builds to the upside, with the black arrow being a lot bigger than the red. And this is the idea that we want to apply to our regional market graphs to show where prices can go from here. The only really change around the winter of 25 is the black arrow shrunk just a touch from where the January forecast had it, but the red arrow did as well. So again, the risk is much more to the upside, and that's why we get to the market section and we see most of our markets for both electric and gas at 52-week lows. Great point to at least hedge some of that in now. Taking a look at market news. So just to go through, there's been a lot of things for tariffs and problems because of the energy independence we have to trying to go to clean energy. The problem has been that we were able to do current energy industry as energy independent, and now we're having reliance on foreign countries, with a lot of that reliance going to China. So a law that continues to come up is the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, the UFLPA. Most recently, we're just seeing luxury cars from Porsche, Bentley, Audi, all being held up at the border because of components in the cars that are deemed to come from forced labor from particularly the Uyghur minority in China. So it's showing that that supply chain continues to have problems. More importantly is what it means for the energy industry. So yes, some EVs, this is particularly luxury cars. What we talked about last week with just our group here is that India was trying to fill the need that the US has, because we've had the Commerce Department investigation into the 4 Southeast Asian countries who were basically rubber stamping Chinese products and sending them here because we weren't going to let them in for other reasons. So India, though, during 2023, they made great improvements to what they were importing to the US. Come to find out, a lot of those solar panels have actually had Chinese parts. So they're doing the same thing that the Commerce Department found the Southeast Asian countries are doing. So even though they increased the number of solar imports to the US, a lot of them have been stopped at the border from coming in. So one thing is, it further shows how much this clean energy push relies on foreign countries, especially China. And it also really risks trade retaliation from China, because if we keep blocking their products, we've talked about South Korea wanting us to go easier on using some components so they can take some of the tax money for expanding EVs, but they need parts from China. And now we have India saying, hey, you know, can we move forward with this? And right now the stance is no. So this could cause a lot more supply chain issues. We need to keep an eye on this story. Taking a look at policies and regulations. So using California as the example here, because they've been really leading a lot of policies when they're not passed at the federal level, they can't get through Congress, or they can't be enacted by President Biden currently for the clean energy push. We've seen a lot of those efforts being started in either the city or the state, in the cities of or the state of California, and then being adopted around the country. One thing that we talked about in December and January a little, but it's making the rounds on headlines again. And we want to equate this really to the energy portion of rules, but this is a flashy headline a lot of people have been talking about, is that the plastic bag bans that were put in place in California, where they started and then adopted by other places like New Jersey, have actually had the exact opposite effect. So they're actually causing way more plastic waste than banning than before the ban was put in place for plastic bags. So when it comes to the energy industry, I mean, a lot of the far left policies, again, are coming from California and then being adopted by cities. And we've had states adopt it, like the state of New York with the natural gas ban on hookups for new construction and renovations, which has caused a lot of issues and debates around the country. So recently, it's been a quieter story that hasn't hit as much, is that the Berkeley ban on natural gas hookups was actually overturned in the courts. So what is that going to mean for the rest of the country? Because again, if forced electrification happens, that's going to cause a lot more demand, and we're not really replacing demand. Again, we're shutting down fossil fuels and trying to install new renewable supply, but we've talked about the mini projects in most of the states on the northeastern seaboard and mid-Atlantic that have canceled or pushed back their offshore wind projects. We have the issues with the solar supply chain, really, that has to do with the China, the minerals, the mineral refinement, and the actual labor to put them together. So good intentions don't necessarily mean good results. So we need to keep an eye on the impacts. And the question comes down to whether our leaders are gonna, take a look at the results of what's happening and, make adjustments to timelines and what needs to be done, or if it's pushed clean by any means necessary, which is going to lead to a lot more potential for price spikes and put us on a much more precarious road for really the term that our clients are looking at for 3 to 5, 6 years. Sticking on the regulation and rules front, when it comes to FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that has oversight on a lot of this build out of clean energy, and a lot of things need to be done from transmission to planning to how things are actually going to function as a market. We now have Democratic FERC Commissioner Phillips being appointed as the actual official chairman of FERC. He was the acting chairman for around a year, so not really big change there. However, the other Democratic FERC commissioner, because right now it's 2 Democrats to 1 Republican, Clements, announced that she is not seeking another term. So right now, her term expires at the end of June this year. So she could be gone as soon as June, which is right around the corner. So we have a lot of stuff happening in June. We have the solar waiver expiring. We have her leaving FERC. She could stay on as long as January 3rd of 2025, depending on when the congressional Congress ends for the session. If she leaves, it's going to be left with 1 Democrat, 1 Republican, and no quorum. So really, a lot of the votes that need to be held to build out transmission, approve these projects, all the really comes grinding to a halt. So it could throw a huge wrench in the many different facets of our energy industry for this build out. So something to be aware of that could cause more problems while we're at those, when we get to the markets, we're at or around 52-week lows. Good time to take some of that risk off the table. Moving over to global issues, taking a look at Hamas attacking Israel and the response. The thing we've been looking at is through the very narrow lens of energy supply and demand and how that could be impacted in the supply chains. So right when the war started off, we had natural gas platforms, some oil stuff shut down that we've talked about, the Tamar platform being one of them. And the bigger question was, will the fighting expand to other areas? Will there be any problems in the body of water, through the Suez Canal, through the Strait of Hormuz? Well, those are all coming to fruition, unfortunately, as the war and the fighting has continued to spread between other countries in the Middle East, and the US, the UK, Canada, and Australia making attacks against the Houthis and other groups that are fighting. So that's not been going well, and the result is, if we take a look at that middle picture next to the paragraph, the reroute. So instead of ships going through the Suez Canal, which is blue, they're now taking a route around the tip of South Africa, and that can be 14 to 18 days in one direction. So you're almost looking like at a month of extra time for the shipping to happen, and it's already starting to hit the clean energy supply chain as well as the just energy goods of oil, natural gas, and stuff that's traveling over there. So that's continuing. The other bit, and just out, is a new declaration by the shipping giant Maersk, who is now saying they're expecting this rerouting of ships to happen into at least the second half of 2024. So it doesn't look like this is just a quick blip. This could really start to be felt as the supply chains continue to be held up. People pay premium to get ships. That premium is then usually passed on to the end user. So that could happen to the energy products. We also had a gas pipeline blown up in Iran. Iranian officials are claiming that it was from terrorist attacks, but it's showing again, another supply is being taken out because of the war. So how will this move forward? Will it be a quick resolution? It doesn't seem like that, since Israel is coming out and saying, it's going to take at least several more months from now, and Hamas does not seem anywhere close to the term Israel has set forth, and vice versa. Moving over to China, big story we got to look out for. June 2024 this year, the solar waiver is supposed to be going away that President Biden said he would not extend, although Congress had passed legislation to overturn this waiver in the first place. President Biden, as a reminder, vetoed that, and they didn't have the threshold to get over to overturn his veto on this. So what happens to the solar industry when this happens? We know in February of 2022, when the Commerce Department had the investigation, the entire solar industry ground to a halt until June of 2022 when the waiver was enacted. Another important story is the relationship between China, the EU, and the US has not been getting better in recent times. So we have right now the EU is proposing sanctions against several Chinese companies with the goal of hurting the Russia's war capabilities from the supply side. China is very upset about this, and they say they might retaliate in terms of trade if this happens. So again, trade wars are not good for prices or for building out and making huge changes on systems. More importantly, which we need to keep a very close eye on, see when the reports come out, is they've stopped exporting certain materials and technologies from China. Some reports have them in control about 60% of the world's rare minerals and up to 90% of the processing of those rare minerals. So in August of 23, they cut off things to do with computer chips because the US and China and the EU are fighting about computer chips, with the Huawei versus NVIDIA and Taiwan sitting in the middle of that. In December, they started cutting off energy products with types of graphite products like graphene that are used in EV batteries. So not having EV cars on the road would actually be slightly bearish because you'd have less demand from those EV cars. But the bigger story is at the end of December, around the 22nd, they cut off basically technology to process minerals needed for wind turbines. So we've talked about the many problems with solar and actually getting built, the offshore wind projects here. Now, if we don't have the technology to do it without China, that could make it much worse. And even scarier would be, do they start cutting off other critical minerals for this big changes that we need? So if we continue to shut down supply of reliable, tested fossil fuels and aren't able to build the new clean energy supply, we're going to be in a very tough spot in the next several years. So keeping an eye on that. Moving over to the Russia-Ukraine, the escalation of arms has continued as a new weapon, the Zircon, has been used by Russia against Ukraine. So first time doing that in the fight. Again, there's been nuclear rhetoric. There's probably about 30 or 40 stories that could have been used here, but these are the ones just explaining that things are not going well. We have Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia talking about building bunkers along the Russian border. We have NATO holding Steadfast Defender 24, which is the biggest NATO military exercise since the Cold War. We have the Senate passing a huge amount of money to go towards the Ukraine, which still needs to pass the House. So, and Russia is digging its heels in as well. So it doesn't seem like it's coming to a resolution anytime soon. The proposition by Putin that directly to the US, not involving the Ukraine, was leave the battle lines where they are now, call it Russia and Ukraine, was rejected by the US. So it doesn't seem like we're willing to come to an agreement like that. And we also, the other story was, we covered last week, but for the channel partners on the line, is China has now come out publicly to offer their full support for Russia in this war, which was the reason probably is a retaliation with the EU proposing sanctions against these Chinese companies. So these wars are starting to kind of blend together, where enemy of my enemy are kind of taking sides. And that story continues as Russia, we've talked about, hosted an Iranian party with Hamas representatives and says, you know, I mean, we're against Israel. So picking different sides, kind of fighting proxy wars. Again, for the energy industry, this is not good for supply and good relations for prices. Could cause a lot of issues with that. We're already starting to see those continue to build up. Again, for the winter, we had a NERC winter warning. This winter so far hasn't really materialized for the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, although we have been getting the storms over the past couple of weeks, not coming as big as they were forecast originally in a lot of places. But this was supposed to be the teeth of winter, which was back half of January to the beginning of March, with some cold possibly on the way this weekend as well. For those on the line, for channel partners, this is an updated chart as well. We see it going further over to the right, including 2025. And we look at the two red arrows for solar and wind. We do not see those shooting straight up to take over part of the electricity generation. So this is saying in facts and figures that although a lot of the headlines out there were going to solar, going to the wind, at least in the short term, we don't really see a huge contribution coming out of either of those assets, which could be further complicated by any of the stories we just covered. Again, for the back half of 2022 and front half of 23, back half official figures should be out shortly. We're not really seeing too much movement if we look at our major markets with the green. We're looking at the number next to the green or red triangles. So we're seeing a small percentage up or small percentage down over quarter. So we're not really seeing those changes. gains of 5, 10, 15% to put us on schedule for what is being put across the headlines and what a lot of the leaders, political leaders, are hoping to accomplish. Take a look at the PJM capacity market. Capacity pass-through is still a solid option that lets a client take actions to reduce their own cap tag, but also take advantage of the new rules of subsidized assets being allowed in most of those clean energy assets, whether they're clean energy generation or demand response, to be into the capacity markets, which drives down prices. And those rules started below the yellow line. And then a little update to the slide here. 2 new rule changes have been approved for the PJM capacity auction. So the auction that was for June of 25 through May of 2026 that had been pushed back till June of 23, that got kicked just days before, is now looking to be starting this year on June 12th. Again, last time it was canceled basically just a couple days before, so that could always happen again. Usually adds premium to locking in the capacity. So again, that lends itself to why capacity pass-through might be the right solution. And then some updates to this slide as well for ISO New England. So FERC, we have new rules coming into the auction. Currently, the FCA 18 is underway. It started February 5th, and we should be getting those results in the coming weeks. But ISO New England proposed kicking back FCA 19 from February of 25 to February of 26. That was approved by FERC. Whether this was a plan to get a leg in the door to move this legislation forward, they're now looking, ISO New England is now proposing to push it back another year and completely change the capacity market. We don't know if this is talk or if it's going to be real. There's going to be some discussions in the coming weeks and maybe a vote in March whether this is to be pursued. But a lot of changes could be coming to the ISO New England market or not. Probably is going to amount to more premium being put on. So again, capacity pass-through could be a good solution since subsidized assets are continuing to be allowed into the market, with FCA 19 supposed to be the auction that allows a lot more of these subsidized assets in, because they've been slowly put in on 17, now this auction at 18, and then going to be finalized in 19. Taking a look at weather for just, 3-month outlook. This was the January release for February through April forecast. We were taking a look at around the Great Lakes in Maine. Some of that likely above darker reds had disappeared, so more chance of storms hitting the New England and Mid-Atlantic regions in ISO. But the freshly released February 15th for March, April, May, that dark red setting in around the Great Lakes, much of New England, top of PJM in New York. So this is why we kind of maybe saw the price slide over the past couple days, going down, hitting new 52-week lows in a lot of these markets. People feeling that we didn't really have the price spikes during the storm that was just supposed to come in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. So on the El Nino story, it did stick around. We didn't have as much blocking so far as we go through winter. Big question is already starting. What happens next winter? Because prices are very low for the winter months for all of our markets right now. So locking those in when they're low is a great thing to do, especially if it's starting to come out that La Nina might set in before the end of this coming summer. So if we're walking into next winter, because again, our client terms go more than just what's in front of us, and looking out in the future for value, and those prices for the future have moved down because this winter has been pretty tame compared to what could have been. That if La Nina comes in, it could be a lot colder next winter. So we could, if this continues to build and it comes sooner than later, especially if it just comes before next winter, could see those prices get a lot higher, and we could be expecting a snowy winter if La Nina does develop. We did know that it was forecast to be snowy and cold by a lot of other forecasts. We still have a little bit of winter left, but we've made it through most of it pretty unscathed. But it's all going to come down to polar blocking, basically the oscillation around the North Pole, which way it's spinning. And you can only predict that 4 days to 2 weeks out. So we still have some time if storms are going to come through. Taking a look at ISO New England, it's going to be chilly through the weekend into the start of next week. Similar Saturday to Tuesday really being the coldest for PJM. See if we'll have any spikes on the LMPs to see if that'll move up the future pricing. MISO, usually that starts early before it comes left, seeing Friday, Sunday being the coldest, and the cold day looks to be Saturday for ERCOT for the low. And even though some of those graphics for the New England PJM area didn't necessarily have a bunch of snow, we see the light blue to dark blue below an inch to 1 to 3 inches. There might be some snow coming in over the weekend. And the question is, does it push from upstate New York, Vermont, and New Hampshire into the rest of the region? And this is the forecast for snow going from today, that came out today, through Sunday. Taking a look at market data, we see kind of the whole year and the winters coming off, because just recently, January and February 25 and Jan 26 were closer to the top of the graph on the y-axis. We've seen those kind of shrink away. And as we take a look at balance of the year, so balance of the year being March to December, because we're in February right now, we see that ICE in New England balance off 2.5 mils week to week, establishing the new 52-week low just yesterday. And again, a reminder, you might be wanting to pair these graphs with the long-term graph, because we're losing all those old highs of where prices could go from here. So it looks like, prices for most of 23 looked, if we just look at the 52-week, above the 52-week average here, where just a couple weeks ago, it would have looked like that whole thing was below the 52-week average when you had this piece still included on the 52-week graph. So a lot different world, but we are still around those lows, or establishing the new lows, which is a great point to lock in. Take a look at ICE New England Cal 25 off 2.5 mils as well week to week, establishing the new 52-week low yesterday. For ICE New England gas off 3.5 cents week to week, establishing the new 52-week low yesterday. And calendar year 25 for Algonquin off 3 cents week to week, establishing the new 52-week low yesterday. So people are feeling comfortable with March. We didn't have the spikes over the snowstorm that was supposed to just crush. So we're seeing these prices slide. How much lower they can go for the future? It's a very good point to lock in if we look at historicals, and that's why you want to pair it with some of the LMP material that we have that marketing puts out on Allego. Taking a look at the monthly chart for PJM future pricing, again, we're seeing all the bars kind of shrink from that top point that they were touching not too long ago. And we're seeing, the 5.5 for January 25, a little bit above that line for the future, around the 6.3 mark for January 26. Not long ago, they were not at 6 or 5, they were at 25. So, that's the difference of how much they could lose if these go back up, and how much can they low. They can only go to 0, but the winter months are never going to get down there. Maybe 3 would be low, real low, because they already are there. Taking a look at PJM for balance of the year, March to December, off 1.5 mils week to week after establishing the 52-week low yesterday. And also for the PJM chart, just a reminder, since we've lost these old highs, the y-axis here is only going up, picking up by 1. So it looks like it's bouncing around a lot more, where really that's just that shaded blue box. So it becomes more magnified as we look at this. Taking a look at PJM Western Hub for Cal 25, off 1 mil week to week, now closer to the 52-week low. So this is the only one that didn't really establish a new 52-week low, but it is back below the average. Great time to lock in that PJM, at least a piece of that. Taking a look at PJM gas, TETCO M3 balance of the year, off 2.5 cents week to week, establishing the new 52-week low yesterday. And for TETCO, calendar year 25, off 1 cent week to week, establishing the new 52-week low yesterday. So Northeast, ICE New England PJM prices pretty much at or around the lows. And how much lower can they go, where there's a lot more chance that they go to the upside, because we've now made it through winter pretty much. And taking a look at ERCOT going on the future, the really concern is, where is July and August of this summer going to end up, and will that push forward into the summers of 25 and 26 to lock in? Recently they were down as low as the 7s, high 6s. They pushed up to 11.7 recently, and kind of bouncing back up and down on news about how this winter's going to be, summer's going to be in ERCOT. Taking a look at ERCOT, Houston load zone for balance of the year was off 4 mils week to week, now just below the 52-week average, after we've kind of had that roller coaster, prices going back and forth up for balance of the year. But if we look at calendar year 25, it's the opposite side of the bounce where it keeps going between the 52-week average and 52-week high. We almost hit the 52-week high over the past week with calendar year 25 up 3.5 mils week to week. Gas and ERCOT, different situation. So Houston Ship Channel off 2.5 cents week to week after establishing the new 52-week low yesterday. And similarly, calendar year 25 for Houston Ship Channel for ERCOT off 1 cent week to week, establishing the new 52-week low yesterday. And we know Houston Ship Channel right across from the Henry Hub in Erath, Louisiana. So we got similar prices, similar shape of the middle blue 52-week graph. But basis as we go around the country, ICE New England being the biggest, and it's closer together on the right side that is on the left. The closer the blue is to the gray, lock in that basis, good opportunity. And we see that the red basis of beforehand on the left side, the red line being over the gray, showing that, I mean, it's the positive side. Now the red's underneath it. Now our clients have different loads in different months, and since the winter months are most expensive, that ends up usually giving you a positive basis for most of our clients for locking in PJM. But what a great time to lock in gas, at least the basis for PJM. And just taking the look under more of a microscope for Houston Ship Channel, Henry Hub, and TETCO M3 for PJM. Taking a look out in the future, taking a look at ICE in New England. 25 was off 2.5 mils, outer years off, mostly off a little bit less than that. These multi-year line graphs, especially when talking about a term past 12 months or so, or 24, really help giving clients an idea of how everything's been moving, where that risk is, and applying the idea of the black and red arrows from the risk that we looked at earlier in the presentation to where things could go from here. So whether you want to call it the top of where 2024 traded before it stopped trading when the year started, because now we're in balance of the year, or you want to use calendar year 25's top to say, okay, where were we when, the Russia situation started off, and then we've had China, Israel, all the clean energy push happening here. So maybe this is where the bottom of prices could go. Put a line in here. This is where prices are now, and here's where prices could go up to, here or here. So as we can see, the chance of the amount prices could go up before you start getting into complicated statistics, just painting a picture, using a picture to convey an idea. A lot more risk of prices going up than going much lower. Taking a look at PJM going out into the future, 25 was off a mil, outer years mostly off a little bit less. 25 is 4 mils cheaper than 2026 right now. This story of where is the risk, how high can prices go from there, the closer things get to us, the more response they can have. So again, as 2024 approached the end, we saw it thought it was going to be an okay winter with enough gas. We see 24 fall off. But these other ones, it's hard for them to trade through the fundamentals until we get closer. But 25 coming off the most, and then you see 26, 27 not really giving up the same amount of gains. Taking a look at ERCOT Houston, which trades a lot closer, a lot flatter if we look across the bar graphs. And again, the gray bar on these bar graphs is the average price during the year of 2023. So January 1st, 23 through December 31st, 23, the average price of what 24 traded at. So where it could go from here. And we see, since those lines are most closer together, we see that the green, light blue, and magenta purple line are pretty much all over the top of each other right now, where in the past there was a little bit of separation. So those are trading very closely in ERCOT. Lastly, major points from January, most of them the same, a couple of tweaks here, but managing risk of how high or low the market can go from here. We are near the lows in most of our markets. Great time to lock in. Use them with historical LMPs to show where they cleared, to show that they shouldn't really get much lower than they are now, at least for the winter months that have come off very sharply over this winter. Evaluate in longer terms to get some value before things could turn around, because there's many stories that things could get very rocky to the upside. Important thing that's going to be coming out for ICE New England and PJM, utilities are going to be focusing on summer rates if they have them, because they don't include the winters, which are the most expensive months. So those summer rates compared to a 12 or 24 month rate are going to, the 12 or 24 is going to look a lot more expensive with January, February, March included in December. So being able to help explain that to a client to de-escalate and make sure they're thinking about it the right way. Again, most of our major markets are at the 52-week lows, just establishing it with PJM electricity 25, just a little bit above. ERCOT, that different situation. The worries about the summer that's coming after breaking records in demand this past summer, and not the best performance of some of the renewable assets. And then the idea of the whole government push of going clean continues to grow. The story hasn't changed. It's only been accelerated. And the question is, with our reliance on other countries needed to complete this, if we continue to lose fossil fuel supply and not being able to bring on reliable and resilient renewable supply, what's that going to do for prices? Could leave us in a very precarious situation. And lastly, helping differentiate, talking about other products and services, as well as the different components of capacity and renewables, because they can make up a huge portion of a client's bills and helping them maximize